Hello, I'm David Bradley, and this is from the Mind of a Mystic. And today we've got a good friend of mine, Mr. Eddy Hayden Smith.
Howdy.
So, one of the focuses of this episode, I think, in the little pre-discussion we had, was to talk about a few different notions of philosophy and free will, and then we also wanted to roughly cover something about you had an interesting experience. So maybe we could start with that, which was you had a recent meditation retreat. In fact, actually, give us a bit of history about like your sort of meditation retreat. Let's start there.
I recently went on a Vipassana meditation retreat.
Can you give us like a bit of a brief description of what Vipassana is?
I did one a couple of years ago. Did a 10-day course. I just went and did a 3-day course, and Vipassana means insight meditation, and it's a sort of very ancient meditation tradition that is claimed to descend from the Buddha and his original followers and stuff.
There is a specific sort of, not like a sect, but a denomination of it that begins with T?
Yeah, so Theravada Buddhism is, as far as I understand, that's the tradition of the elders. So like the original, like based on the original sort of teachings and scriptures. So like the earlier scriptures and stuff in Buddhism.
You say it's quite purist, or?
I think it's as opposed. So the other branch of Buddhism is Mahayana, which is this sort of that evolved more in Tibet, and has, I think, a little bit more, maybe a little bit more sort of
More traditional religious aspects, maybe.
Yeah, it's got a little bit more kind of not exactly deities, but kind of like it's a little bit more wishy-washy. I don't know. But I'm sure it's got some
particular taste.
No. I'm sure it's just different. It's just a bit different. Actually, to be honest, I don't know a lot about that really.
But you're more involved in this other school, in that practice, or is that just?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm more interested in that. Although I'm definitely not. I wouldn't call myself a Buddhist or anything like that. But I am interested, because I think, to me, it's not. It's clearly not a religion, and it's like the original teachings of the Buddha and the people who wrote that down and studied that. It's clearly not a religion, the original stuff. I mean,
I remember you said we had a previous talk on my other channel called Schizophreniforms, where you referenced in the chat that Buddhism is kind of like an early science of the mind.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think if the Buddha existed as a person who came up with all this stuff, as is claimed, then I mean, he was just an incredible philosopher, visionary, someone who really gazed deep into his own, into the phenomena that arose in his experience, and an incredible psychologist, philosopher.
And that kind of leads quite nicely into this, from my vague knowledge of us having discussed it recently. The kind of experience of this Vipassana session, I was quite curious to explore a little bit.
I mean, it was, for me, it was a very profound experience. So, obviously, the Buddha, one of his main concerns was, suffering, and how to eradicate suffering. So that's what he sort of addressed himself to, and he talked about how life is dukkha, which kind of means suffering, but also means kind of has lots of other kind of meanings, like impermanence and insubstantiability and kind of like emptiness. So he came up with ways to basically the idea that the reason we suffer is because we have craving and aversion ultimately. At the Vipassana course, they do a very specific style of meditation, which is again claimed to go all the way back to the original followers of the Buddha, and has been passed down by monks for a very long time. It's basically you begin by just meditating on your breath, and just following your breath.
You say it's a very specific area?
Yeah, it's just a very small area just under your nose, because the idea is to increase just concentration, which they call samadhi. So to fine-tune the samadhi before you start vipassana. So that's the breath meditation, which is called anapana, and you just focus on a very small area under your nose.
And that's kind of like I think the way I took from the way how you described it before, it's like almost like drawing a microscope towards.
Exactly. Yeah. So you just, and then at some point they say, "Oh, move your attention to just the area on your sort of upper lip, and observe any sensations there." And suddenly you notice there's all these kind of weird little pulsations and like tinglings and ripplings and all this weird stuff going on. You're like, wow. And the more you focus in, it's very strange. You follow an itch, you take a little itch and you follow it, and you realise it has this kind of long shape, and it ends here and it goes round, and it's like all weird. That you can go it's very strange. And then at some point, the 10-day course, they do it on like day 4 or something. They go, right, so we now just move our attention to the top of our head, and a very small area on top of your head, and you notice there's all this kind of tingling and movement there, and then you move to your whole scalp, and then you move to your forehead and your eyes, and you just like one part at a time, and you just notice there's just all this. The first time it happened to me, it was crazy. There's all this stuff going on. It's just all over your body, and it's like a kind of organism. It's just sort of going on all the time. Yeah. So their idea, the sort of theory behind this school of Vipassana meditation anyway, is that all these sensations are currently going on unconsciously, and we're always reacting to them, and that's kind of what our sort of the bulk of our sort of craving and aversion is. It's these sensations in the body. Yeah. So if I was more aware of my sensations, I might have a sip of coffee, and then I might notice this kind of wave of tingles going on my back, and all these kind of strange things. Yeah. And you realise that so basically you go through all this, keep going through the body, but the most important thing is that you observe it equanimously. So this is a word they use all the time, equanimous, which means
it's sort of like ambivalence, or
like
non-reactive.
Yeah, non-reactive, like not like. So you definitely don't want to like play games with it and try and get, I want this sensation and I don't want this sensation. The whole point is you just observe it, and even if something very uncomfortable comes up, you don't stop meditating, you don't stop it, you just keep observing and you keep moving. And the idea is you're training your unconscious to be more equanimous. Basically. Sure. Yeah. That's basically just it. But yeah, the last time I was there, I had this. I can't quite put it into words right now. It just felt so profound at the time. Like it felt like it was this just organism going on inside me, and all this aversion and craving and sensation, and and for one of the only 2 times in my life, I guess the other time was at the other Vipassana retreat, I felt like I was just, for some moments, just totally equanimous to it, and just observing it. Yeah. And you just get this.
If you could sort of like paint a verbal picture of, if you see what I mean, like how would, if you were to imagine it.
I imagined it whenever I had my eyes closed. Whenever I was in that state, I would see like visuals of like plant shapes, like natural shapes, like flowers or plants, or and sometimes insectoid kind of shapes.
Did they correlate with the different?
Yeah, previously, it's insectoid correlated a bit with aversion, and the plants more with. This time it was mainly the sort of plant shapes, but I just felt like that. I could. It felt like, I can't really describe it, but it felt like after I left the meditation hall and I was walking around and just seeing all the plants, it felt like that was in me. Like I was looking at the plants and like all those patterns in the world out there. That's why I was seeing the patterns, because they're the same. Like this is like they call it like the Dharma, which is the method, but it also means like the kind of law and the law of nature, and that this is all, when you're observing all that, you're just observing nature. This is just the patterns of nature, like rising up from moment to moment in this way, and you kind of like
the kind of subject-object divide. Because I know that with Buddhism, one of the kind of aims is to reduce the distance between perspective of your identity and the world as separate.
Yeah, I mean, I totally had. I mean, another thing you're meant to do as well as observing. So when you go through sensations, you should be observing basically the other two marks of existence. One is impermanence, so you're just constantly noticing that all these changes, sensations are constantly changing, and there's nothing you can grab hold of because they're just constantly changing. But also, an Atman, no self, that they're not as in selflessness as in the opposite of selfishness, but selflessness as in the absence of a solid you, a solid core, which is you, which is independent from everything else going on. And there's actually just these sensations arising and changing, and there is no self in it because you're not controlling them. You're not. You can't control. They're just happening. You know, there is no you in it in the traditional sense of the word. So yeah, I did have that a lot. I mean, I was also, when I was walking around, just observing my movements and my blinking and my breathing and my walking and my thoughts, and just noticing how all of these are just arising, like, you know, like almost like just like an organism, like you're watching like you could watch a butterfly moving, and you can watch your own eyes moving and blinking, and like, where's the difference? Like, you're not anymore deciding like when to blink, where to look, and than you are then deciding when the butterfly is moving its wings. Or
it reminds me of this thing I was watching this guy, Dr. Bruce Lipton, talk about the subconscious, and he says that sort of 1 to 5% of our experience of reality, he talks about it in terms of bits, so like the conscious focus of the mind has like the equivalent of 40 bits of data, and the subconscious mind has somewhere like 40 million bits of data in comparison.
Yeah.
And it's almost as though it reminds me of that, in that when you remove it sounds like what they're doing is removing the conscious. It leads on to what we want to talk about, one of the main topics, which is free will, but this sense of agency, this sense that you're driving around in yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like it's a practice of or de-identifying with that 1 to 5% of yourself, and sort of then you notice the other 95% that's there.
Yeah, I think that's the part. But also, even that 1 to 5% of yourself, if you really observe it, you notice you're not actually deciding these things.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like right now I'm aware.
Focuses,
yeah, and you know, right now I'm talking, and I think that's, you know, conscious. I'm conscious that are words coming out of my mouth, but I'm not really choosing every word before it appears out of my mouth. And it's the same with a lot of things. I came up with this meditation once, which was like, if you just to observe blinking.
You told me. Yeah, go on.
And so you just kind of, you know, notice that you're blinking. You notice your eyes are moving, and then you kind of keep that in your awareness, but then simultaneously move your awareness to something else, like maybe you're talking, or maybe you're breathing, or maybe you're walking, or, you know, whatever you're doing. Maybe you're making a cup of tea, and you realize that there really is no, you know, if this is involuntary, my blinking, like, why is it involuntary? It's involuntary because I don't know when I'm next going to blink, and I don't decide to blink before I blink, like, it just blinks. But actually, almost everything is like that. You don't decide, you know, making a cup of tea, I don't decide to, like, stir with it, like, before. I don't decide to say this before. I don't decide to breathe before. It's like nearly everything. There's very few things that we actually have, like, a conscious thought, now I'm going to do this, and then we do, you know, there's so few. I mean, they do happen,
there's quite a lot in neuroscience to suggest that sense is entirely false, like, in the brain as well. Like, the idea that, like, you're instructed, for example, to move your hand, and then you move your hand, but there's markers in the brain where far prior to your actual conscious experience.
They can pick up you were going to do that.
Yeah. And there's also, like, what was it? There's some sense of, I forget my point, but it's to do with we're living in a delay as well. That's quite an interesting thing that neuroscience.
Yeah, it's somehow like our experience of the world is almost buffered.
Yeah, like a buffer on a video or something.
Yeah. Like, as Sam Harris talk about free will, when you're saying, oh, like, if you touch your nose with your finger, like, it's definitely your the sensation from your nose will reach the brain quicker than your finger, cause but you know, but it seems simultaneous, and like because everything is kind of buffered to a certain point to create a, you know, kind of some
Well,
unified
that does
sensation.
lead us on quite nicely to our topic, which is free will and predeterminism. Because from my perspective on reality is that I think this possibly cross-correlates with you, but I'm going to let you sort of explore that a bit for the video. But my idea of reality is that everything is predetermined. Everything is in a state of constant, like I've seen that Sam Harris talk, for example. He's talking about how, and it makes me think that we are completely at the whim of the progression of the universe, and like there's no chaos, there's no like if it's one congruent system. If the universe is a whole, then nothing is not correlated with other events. It's just a giant ball of correlation, or like an infinite sphere of correlation. And I don't believe that we have any more say in. Do you see what I mean? Like with the matter of conscious experience, like we can't choose. I think he references serial killers, like and how someone doesn't have any control over the fact that they've been exposed to these phenomena that generate that in themselves.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So, but sort of. Sorry, I've had too much caffeine today. But in regards to agency and free will, that's something that I think you've explored quite sort of extensively in your meditation and your thoughts in general. So, if you want to give us a bit of insight into that, that'd be quite interesting.
Yeah, just really that it's an illusion.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's
Well, it's
not
a
really
simple
much
thing
to
to say, but then how you reach that conclusion and validated that information. Shut up, you. It's rowdy seagulls. That actually worked that way. How did you reach that conclusion? What evidence do you have for it?
I mean, as something that Sam Harris kind of tries to point out in that talk as well, that when he talks about free will, is that actually one of the, even everything else besides talking about how events occur and stuff and studying all of that, and at the end of the day, like in your actual own experience, this concept of free will doesn't really hold up even in our own lived experience. When we actually analyse moment to moment, when we just observe moment to moment what's occurring.
I mean, one of the phrases you've mentioned was Alan. You when you've explained it to me before was Alan Watts saying, "If I am my foot, then I am the sun." Kind of thing. I think it's some.
Yeah, I mean that's a cool phrase. Yeah. I mean, because although that's more that's almost more like the other thing I was saying. So that's more like kind of sort of analysing how events occur in the world and just kind of looking at that and kind of logically and intellectually, but even just from a direct observation point of view, like everything that's happening is just happening. So if I have a thought, where does that thought come from? Like it just appears, out of the blackness, out of the darkness. It's like right now I could, I'm just going to try and have a random thought, there's a lobster hanging from the moon, with cheese in its pincer, like, so did I create that thought? Did I author that thought? Like I just said to myself, I'm going to have a random thought, and then it appears out of the blackness.
The conscious part of yourself asked that question.
But then even the conscious part of myself, where did that thought come from? Oh, I'm going to have a random thought now. Yeah. That word, that just appeared as well. Sure, like there wasn't a thing before that was like, now I'm going to think this, and you can't author your thoughts because then you'd have to think them before you think them, which is something else.
Just to emphasise that, you can't author your thoughts because you'd have to think them before you think them.
Which is from the Sam Harris talk.
I heavily agree with that statement though. I think
and it's the same with everything, you can't really, even on, like I was saying, on those rare occasions when you do decide, now I'm going to do this, and you do it, you actually have a thought, I'm going to do this, and you do it. It's the same thing. Where did that thought come from? Why did that thought appear at that moment in that way? Why didn't another thought appear at that moment in that way? I'm going to do Y, not X, or I'm going to do this later, or I'm going to, this is all just a mystery. And it just, to us, to our direct experience, like our life is just, it's just happening, it's just occurring, So I think that's almost more important to just observe. Well, if you're interested in, the idea of free, as an illusion or whatever, if it's of interest to someone, like, that's almost more useful just observing stuff rather than, like, kind of intellectually, or, like, talking about how events occur and stuff, which is obviously, another way into it, like the fact that really there is no such thing in reality as an independent event.
Yeah.
Like independent, what would that mean? It's like every single thing that can occur.
It's like nothing is impossible. You can't have like a void of anything because this exists. It sort of demonstrates that there can't be nothing, therefore there can be no isolated event. Like, because it's a system.
Yeah.
And it's inextricably linked.
Yeah, it's just a great interdependent pattern, so there could never,
So one thing... sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, one thing that me and you have often debated, and that I think might be of interest to discuss now, is I ascribe the sense of observation, the fact that you can observe or you have awareness of these processes that are taking place, granted without agency, but you're more inclined to believe that there is no self, or the selfless state. It is a matter of your conscious experience, whereas with mine, I believe that the self is that very observation, the conscious part of the self that can observe. I argue that is the self. That's kind of my evidence for the self.
Yeah. When you say self, do you mean like the
like
great
something
self?
that is
Or do you mean like an individual self? Do you mean like the Atman or something, or do you mean like a kind of individual?
Yeah. So when I talk about the self, it's like the part of me that is me is irreducible.
That is David, or that is.
That is. So that's a good point. But I identify my consciousness, my individual self, and the grander universal self. But let's not go down that rabbit hole just yet. But the part of me that is me is that observation, because I've been in so many altered states and reduced my sensory data and my consciousness, and like I think I've talked to you before. It's in. I'll come back to this talking about my writing and stuff. But there's this. Even in the deep sleep state, you can retain a sense of, or if you consciously enter that experience with the alert mind still present, there is this sense that you can lose everything, including your conscious experience of any reality, and still retain that sense of observation.
But what would you be observing if there was no reality? You'd have to observe something, surely.
It's the absence of reality that creates the... How can I explain it? So without any objective external things to exist, the only thing that exists is me, and and it's that observation. So you can take your observation down into the deep sleep state, that awareness of self, and then you retain a kind of... It's not entirely like normal consciousness.
But what I mean is, don't you have to observe something? You always have to observe something. So
well, that's when you then observe the internal world.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
but you're observing something that you're labelling as yourself, but you're still observing something. So you're observing a phenomena that's arising, like that is there of some kind. It might be.
It's like there's a space there that exists. Without. Yeah, but even that in itself is sufficient evidence to me to believe that, to a certain extent, you can't eradicate your consciousness. You can lose memory of stuff. You can lose the chain of events. This is what I want to talk about in my book a little bit, because that's come back later on to the life is but a dream thing. The idea that we're privy to, and through my own experience of like extreme states of sleep deprivation and altered states of consciousness and stuff like that, I've discovered that it's not that we don't experience alternate realities or alternate states or external different varieties of potential of consciousness. It's that we don't recall between states.
Right.
So the me as this person now in this conscious state, in an ordinary waking state of consciousness, doesn't have direct access to the memories of me for while I was dreaming, but there was still something fundamentally me aware of the dream scenario playing out. And that's this sense of awareness, this observation.
Yeah.
So that's as far as I can reduce myself back. and still retain some sense of conscious experience.
Yeah.
So that is what I consider the self, or like Ken Wilber's object. What's he call it? Ever-present witness. It's like the mind of a deity or something.
Although, I mean, it sounds to me more like that would be better labelled. I mean, I don't know. You know, obviously, I don't have your experiences, but like from what you're saying, you know, like that in my kind of vision of things, that would be more like the Atman, because say you have a dream and you go into a different reality where, for example, you know, you're no longer called David, you no longer look like you do, you no longer like
different
you
scenario,
know, whatever, and say everything's entirely different, and there's nothing, you know, there's nothing about your, you know, I suppose the way you look now, or your character now, your name, whatever, which is the same, or somehow
irrecognisable.
Let's just say some hypothetical scenario,
which is quite common.
But there's still a witness, but there's still the observation.
Yeah.
Then that thing, if we call it a thing, that's observing, or that observation itself, is not David.
No, although
because say David's annihilated, so you're someone else now. So it can't be David. It's just an observation.
This is where we go to. I think I've talked to you before about the cultivation of a sort of transcendent identity, which is. I think the Egyptians practiced a similar kind of thing, and like the Freemasons and various other things, which is retaining some semblance of like a traditional ego, or a concept of self that weaves together all these states into one congruent state of consciousness.
Right.
And the key to that is, for me, the transcendent identity. This consciously in the waking state, reducing myself back through various means to as fundamental an aspect of myself, whilst retaining conscious awareness.
Right.
So similar with your meditation, drawing the focus, like taking that focus internally and seeing how far I can go back within myself and still have a conscious experience. Then from there you weave out into all the realities you're privy to, and as a consequence of that, I remember more of my dreams. I remember my hallucinations vividly. I remember more different. So, like for example, one of the byproducts in the dream state is I can have a very vivid dream, and then be multiple people, because I've got this core transcendent identity. So I can then shift that focal point between different people and be multiple people in one congruent reality in the dream world and stuff like that. And it creates for these very powerful, novel experiences. And I think it's important for most people to practice, but that side of it is based on a belief system that, or a matter of experience, that there can be annihilation of your conscious experience, total annihilation. And that I talked about this in the previous video I did with Sasha Cooper, the psychic, about my experience of annihilation of my conscious self. So like so suicide attempt I did, and I descended to the border of absolute nothingness and then came back. But that gave me this is why it's a belief system, this quite firm belief that you can annihilate consciousness.
But obviously you didn't experience the annihilation.
I didn't experience the annihilation.
You didn't experience the non-consciousness, because that's impossible, right?
Yeah.
So you experienced it shrinking and shrinking to the point where you felt like it was almost...
Yeah, it was like I'd been destroyed.
Yeah. But obviously there was still an observation there for you to recall it. There was some observation of something.
I went in, there was nothing, there's a complete blank in conscious experience, and then these voices screamed me out of it and brought me back here.
Yeah.
So I feel like, and this is partly why I had this perspective that I was dead for a long time, because I thought that I had actually died, and that this reality was an afterlife, you know, which is, as a matter of the conscious experience of it, that's quite a vaguely rational conclusion. When you experience death and then you wake up in a reality that's profoundly phenomenologically different and surreal and not of consistent form and stuff like that, you know, so that gave me a real sense of like so one of the ways I rationalise it now is that it was like I changed timeline or something like that. Like it was a way for my brain to grasp what happened. Like that event caused multiple phenomena to occur, which is this new range of perceptions, but also something from that near-death experience came back with me that then elucidated like a whole other way of existing, I guess. It was, and it, in a weird way, some part of me did actually die, and it was the bit that filtered out all these experiences. It was like a very real ego death, you know, but not one of these glorious hallucinogenic induced ones where you ascend to nirvana and you're experiencing infinite bliss after infinite terror. It was like an annihilation of myself, and then I awoke in a new reality. That was, you know. So that's just going down a bit of a rabbit hole there. But where did I get to? Why did I get onto this subject? I can't quite remember.
We were talking about this self.
Oh, the self.
Thing.
Yeah.
And
so my experience is that I can reduce myself down to the nth degree of like experiencing some consciousness of the verge of an infinite void of nothingness, like entering nothing.
Yeah.
And then, so that's kind of why I think that's probably what I was aiming to explain this. Is like I've been in so many bizarre conscious states that I believe that there is some consistent self, and it may not be the sort of the self with a capital S, but there is some part of me that does continue in every state.
But is that part just observation? Is that what?
Yeah. And but the conscious mind can be trained to follow you down that hole, and then you create this transcendent identity of the person that exists in all states, and it's quite a trippy altered state to be in, but you can, through experiencing these regular exposure to altered states through my psychosis and stuff, I've learned that there is a consistent me that can be woven and create a greater perspective on the realities that are available. Now, whether that is any more real than my egoic self that died in that experience, I don't know. But it seems to me as a matter of almost my faith or my understanding of reality that my job is to expand my conscious mind or my conscious experience or the thread of my conscious awareness to include those other realities, and that's a big part of my spiritual practice, I guess. Yeah. So I jumped right the way down to the second set of questions, and then prior to so I sort of lost the thread a little bit, but yeah, no, this draws us on to the third one, because we covered the few questions I wanted to ask, which was about Vipassana, so we kind of got a bit of a sense of that. Then we got Eastern philosophy and Buddhism, which is something that I'd be happy to discuss further. But there's this notions of self and identity. It's something that you can see that as a tiny creature on my hand. Off you go. Bye bye. Notion of self and identity. So with your experience of free will being an illusion, a lot of people tend to get their sense of identity or their sense of self, or they identify with that agency as being them. And then, so as you've managed to sort of call it, if you will, evolve beyond that misconception.
I wouldn't say.
Well, I would call it that. So you've reached the conclusion that that is no longer a true statement about reality, that you have free will. Then how do you place your identity in the light of that knowledge? Because for someone like yourself or I, that might be relatively a matter of course, but for other people, like I've had conversations with a similar vein where people very, very easily become disconcerted and start to kind of freak out.
I mean, I don't know exactly why. I think I ended up a little bit down this route because I, since I was quite young, I had sort of OCD thoughts, quite unpleasant, intrusive, unwanted thoughts, different subjects and weird things, and just basic thoughts I didn't want. I was always fighting with, and when I first was introduced to sort of mindfulness and meditation of any kind, it was at a CBT course for OCD kind of thing, and they were you know, and it was the first time anyone had sort of ever pointed out to me, you know, made me realise that, wait a minute, like, I'm not creating my thoughts, you know, I'm not authoring my thoughts, you know, they're just appearing, you know, and that was actually incredibly therapeutic realisation for me, you know, like, so I didn't really have this attachment to feeling like I was the author, you know, it was kind of, so maybe that was kind of, obviously not everyone's in that situation, so I can understand why maybe I had less resistance to it. But
so it sort of primed you in a weird way for the ability to see in that way.
Yeah. So I mean, it's for me, you know, there's actually it's very it's actually quite enjoyable to just sort of watch things happen, you know, and when I'm in that state where I'm just kind of, you know, and I kind of realise, like, this is all this is all activity and sensation created by, like, the universe and, like, the great pattern. You know?
Like
and
sort of like we were saying before.
It's kind of amazing, you know. You kind of, like, watch yourself and you watch other people and you realise we are literally the universe. Like, I mean, like, it's not.
That's cool. Yeah.
You know, like, it's just.
It's almost
kind of amazing.
Like when you
just
realise
this
that,
thing
like,
playing
you
out.
were always
You know,
there.
it's like,
Yeah. And it's like we run around as humans with this sense of, like, oh, I am a conscious entity. And that comes from, I think it's some part of the, I think it's like the prelateral something cortex, the conscious mind, the sense of identity, the sense of agency, is in fact what creates consciousness. It's the bit just, I can't remember what it's exactly called, I'll Google it and look it up, but it's the bit just beyond the subconscious. The conscious self is, and we think that we are kind of separate observers of the universe. That's our real experience. But in actuality, we are a conscious entity created by the universe has created us as conscious entities, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Sorry, just like a side.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, I mean, so I mean, personally, I find that quite an amazing thing to. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe if.
I guess the question I was asking was, how do you form a sense of identity? Because for me, again, like, my sense of identity is in that point of observation where I can focus my conscious awareness irreducibly. That's what I developed this is what this transcendent identity is, the part of me that exists in all these bizarre and unusual states. But as someone who isn't maybe doesn't go into the visionary state like that as a matter of course, like I do, because of part of my condition and so on and so forth, and that is kind of the point of this podcast, is to discover alternate frameworks for interpreting what is currently labelled as schizophrenia. But it's not to belittle, like, obviously you've had a profound range of experiences, not to mention especially the Vipassana experiences of this, you know, and I'm just curious as to how do you form a sense of identity when the only thing that is an arbiter in the world that you can own as you, which is your sense of conscious experience. Like, how do you know? I
mean, I don't really feel like I need identity. I feel like identity is, or the ego, you know, is something that just causes sort of tension, and you know, like, I mean, I think there's lots of uses for the word ego, but I think the one that makes sense to me is it's like, which I think is kind of how Alan Watts sort of described it, is it's kind of, we have this image of ourselves. So, you know, I'm called Eddy, and I'm whatever, I play music, and I'm this kind of person, and I'm the kind of person who wouldn't think this kind of thing right now. I'm the kind of person who would feel like this right now. I'm the kind of person who should feel like this right now and should do this right now.
And partially from that, you draw your attractions and aversions as well.
Yeah.
Because you have this kind of sense of, like, this is what I think about a subject, and then dependent on your identity, that creates either you go, okay, I'd accept that thought but not that one, and stuff like that.
But yeah, so it's this kind of image, you know, which is as Alan Watts puts it, is a caricature, because it doesn't contain, you know, nearly a tiny fraction of all the information, all the stuff that's going on, and it's no more you than a image of a tree is a tree, basically, is how he puts it. And so basically, but we have this image of ourselves in our mind all the time, and it's the image that kind of we attempt to turn that image, which is just an image, into an actual agent. So we go, right now I should be like this, this should be happening, I should be. So by trying to turn that image, this desired image, a caricature of us, into an agent, we just get tension, and it creates a physical tension in the body, which is the physical referent of the image. So like
it's almost like being possessed by a concept.
Basically, yeah.
That's when I've experienced the rescindance of ego, like the absence of that self-image, like there immediately comes a profound sense of peace when you accelerate up, and then it's
because you realise there's nothing to do. You know, when it really goes, there's nothing to do but watch.
There is like
there's nothing.
From one particular experience I had, there's this sense of like everything becomes a bit laughable as well. There's like okay, so everything's literally perfect.
Yeah,
like,
the odd moments in my, you know, I wouldn't want to pretend or give the impression that I'm some kind of enlightened person who's always egoless, but I've had a few, you know, I kind of waver on the border of playing around with these ideas, but I've had a few experiences in my life where I feel like I've gone, you know, some kind of release of that concept, kind of in some kind of larger way, and it's funny, you know. There's nothing to do but laugh, almost, and there's nothing to do but kind of just like.
And like it's quite
watch
often
what
like,
happens.
I remember this guy Mark Marcel, sorry, he's done a lot of dimethyltryptamine, and he's a spoken word poet, and he talks about like I think I mentioned this to you before, like it has this concept of you either have problems or you don't exist, and then when you're in that kind of accepting one relinquished, rescinded state, you suddenly look at all your problems like, oh right, that's not a big deal. You still have a conscious sense of self. But you don't have this identity with, I'm suffering so badly because of this, or I'm enjoying this so much as well. It's like a real sense of like, I call it the cosmic joke, or the cosmic joker, you know, where you just like, everything's perfect. Okay.
I mean, in a way, it is the cosmic joke. To me, you know, my kind of perception that we've been talking about of the world and things is that the cosmic joke is that we all think we're in control, you know, and we're all like, oh, things should be like this, and no, I put this here, and that's kind of like the cosmic joke, is this illusion that we this tension that we think, you know, that it's all serious, and it's you know, and that we should be doing something about this, and isn't it awful, you know, that's kind of the cosmic joke. And then that state where you go, wait, there's nothing to do but observe what happens, is the kind of the gag.
The punchline.
It's the punchline.
Oh right, okay. Like, so I've just been doing all this for why? Exactly.
And then you're kind of like, what was all the tragedy? Like, what was the drama? Like, there's some kind of drama unfolding, which was part of this, because you identified as this character.
I call it like a script. People run scripts in their lives, like patterns of behaviour that they have ingrained into them at a very early age, and they run these narratives, and it continually goes, and you identify with that narrative to the point where it becomes pathological, and then eventually you're so traumatized by it that it just goes bang, and then you're like, wait a minute, okay, that was literally just a story running, like a script, a narrative of like a culmination of the universe in me as my particular frame of reference, but really I am simply just like a pinhole of light shining through, and that's not even real. Do you know what I mean? It is quite funny. It's quite a nice feeling. Like I've had that a few times. So that's that
good.
kind
That's
of
what talking about it's bringing me a bit into.
It's cool, and that sort of does come into this sense of identity, because when you're in that state as well, there's not like you cease to exist. There is still some sense of existence as this observational force, but you're not like kind of a human being almost. It's like not being a human anymore. It's just like being like the pinhole of light, and you're looking through it like, alright, yeah, got the whole universe there, it's all playing out, and I'm just watching. But then again, there's this sense of like that's how to make that state permanent, and this or make it have more longevity, and even, and that it be something that becomes pathological, because you enter that state, and it's the sort of a groundwork, and then you get these combatant attitudes towards ego, and instead of what I tend to like to think of it is like an ego is sort of like a dog, like you've got your dog, and it has a series of protocols that's had programmed into it, and if you give it a task, it becomes profoundly functional, useful aspect of yourself. And like you get this when you break beyond the mature ego, the fully formed adult ego, and then you have these transcendent experiences, and you suddenly realise that what you previously was the whole of you is actually now just a tool, or a kind of a very limited aspect of a much grander self.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds sensible, because you're not sort of unrealistically trying to just permanently transcend it, which is, I don't know if that's possible, but so it seems that that's probably quite a good way of visualizing it, I think.
Well, it's like I'm quite adamant that you don't experience true ego death until when your body dies, because your body generates ego. There's this attitude in a lot of Eastern philosophy, the very patriarchal religions as well, like in Christian mysticism and things that I've sort of delved into various times. There's this very much the act of submission of self is one aspect of it, but there's also the destruction of ego, as though it's the only thing, and then once you've done that, that's the end goal.
Right.
And then obviously the ego always returns, because it's a necessary part of our psychological makeup. Yeah. So it's like, that was more of a statement rather than a question.
Fair.
Like, that's my experience. Like this, like people spend all this time trying to eradicate something that is literally just like the skin on your knee. Yeah. And you spent your whole time thinking you're the knee, when in actuality you're the body. And then when you do eventually recognise that you're the body, there's this you open up to a huge old range of potential experiences. But that's just the beginning of this kind of process of self-actualization. So that kind of goes into a little bit like novel experiences and unusual knowledge, which is something I wanted to touch on a little bit, which is like, I think we talked in the last video about like do you remember I asked you what would give validity to vision?
Right,
Like how have your novel experiences, for example, of these, like especially in Vipassana, that's what I was really curious about asking, was you went into this state of, I think you called it the tip of the iceberg of kind of, not on here, but like when we talked about it previously, it's like the tip of the iceberg of like I think you said that you were even tempted to believe that you could feasibly believe that you could be in a state of total equanimity to experience based on that insight.
I mean, I've always kind of had a kind of quite a bit of skepticism about whether what enlightenment would mean, as in the traditional use of the word, and if that's even possible, and like whether that's kind of a myth or. But yeah, I do. I'm still obviously not sure at all. But after that past experience, I did feel like if there is a science of how to eradicate suffering or lessen it, it really did seem like that is it. Like what I experienced at the Vipassana meditation, because and what makes it more convincing as well, that might be it, is it's a fuckload of hard work. It's a lot of work. It's not just like, I'm going to sit around and think for a bit and suddenly become enlightened. It's like shitloads of work,
It's a lifelong quest almost.
Yeah, but it's real work, and you feel that there's real like
progress is being
made. It's just genuine work. You just feel like every moment you're sitting there and you're fully equanimous to these sensations, like you notice that just carries over, and you stop meditating, you walk around the world, and you see all these sensations going on in you, and you don't react to them in the same way, and they're not the same. You're not held by them in the same way, and like, even though it's like I think the amount of work to get there would be huge, because I feel like after the retreat for a couple of days I was still kind of in that place, but only and I was probably meditating about an hour a day, but that's just obviously not enough to keep to kind of keep in that state or to progress. So I'd imagine that's why people would become monks and stuff, because actually, you have to do hours and hours of meditation a day. And
I think one thing that I always think about it is, in regards to like enlightenment, is there has to be, like I talk about like psychedelics as like a window into altered states of consciousness, and then the practice of meditation or spiritual practices in general are a way to walk through the door. Yeah. By comparison. And it's a lot easier to just look at something and think, and then identify yourself as having been attained that state. Whereas in actuality, to progress to the point where you integrate that fully into a whole conscious experience.
That's the work. Like, I mean,
in modern society, there's that pill for every ill perspective of like, psychedelics are a route, but they're not the path.
I mean, at least from my experience, it's like you can have some quite amazing. I've feel like one of the few times that we were talking about earlier, that state of really having transcended that ego and feeling like, wait, I am just the universe, like, and totally like knowing that and just laughing about it was when I was on mushrooms and but it's not it's like a little a little window into it, and you go and then it's useful because you go, maybe that's possible in your normal life, but you're never going to like retain that after you come down, and after a week later you're not going to still be in that state.
Although I do find with my few experiences in the past with psychedelics that it leaves a long lasting kind of, it's almost like someone just goes, hey look, this place exists, and then you're like, okay, and that so opens you up to like
it can alters, like, it can like
the spiritual experience of it as well, the profundity of like, in my own experiences, meeting deity for the first time. Now, I didn't rationally digest that at all for a number of years, but the first time I met God, I was like, I met God, this was sick, this is real, you have to pursue this is the thing, and that draws you forward through a practice of like eradicating the bits that are nonsense, and then you find like a real path of like, okay, I need to actually take this seriously and explore what is real and what isn't real, what's useful, what's not useful, and integrate that into my real life. I think that's why psychedelic medicines are incredibly useful in a world that we're in now, which is where people are conditioned to enter a system of society, which we need people to be conditioned in that way. But like, for example, if you took someone who was like a sadhu and gave them LSD, they might have a beautiful, profound experience, but they would already have a framework of understanding and be able to enter it likely, easier, and navigate that experience with a framework that was healthy and useful. Whereas if you to give it to the average businessman, it's like mind-blowingly explosive process that, because I'm sure the sadhu would still be like gripping the seat and like, whoa, this is intense, but they would at least have like explored those states anyway.
I mean, also I think it's always worth remembering though as well that psychedelics can also be harmful, dangerous. And like I think also not enough people. I think there's a tendency for like whenever people want to like
they glorify it.
So or even just legitimize a drug that is currently illegal. There's a kind of we'll sweep under the carpet any problems it has, and we'll just talk about which is weird because we don't feel like we need to do that with alcohol, do we? Like we drink alcohol and we will happily admit that alcohol is dangerous. Everyone knows that there's
alcoholics out there.
We all know alcohol's dangerous, but we drink anyway, and we also realise it can be good and can be useful. So it's kind of like everything's like that.
Well, that's kind of an argument for legalisation in a weird way, because when you just hear this is glorious, this made this happen, you don't hear the 20 years of work they did to get to the point where that psychedelic made that experience possible, or the years afterwards they spend digesting the experience. And I'm definitely of the belief that like even when I used to smoke weed, like even the bad trips are useful, but there is also like, because it's not safe to discuss these things. People don't know how to navigate the bad trips. People don't know how dangerous one bad trip can be, but then there's this anti, like they only accept the bad trips as being relevant in sort of the legal system. Because that's their job, is to protect us from harm, effectively. Whereas like the sort of hippie underculture and the counterculture will say, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. It's if you have a bad experience, it's your fault, And it's sort of like, I think there's a huge argument for like these things are like LSD is a profoundly dangerous drug to the unexperienced and even the experienced. But it doesn't mean that it's not got this incredible potential for good.
Yeah.
And like you said, you know, there isn't. I'm sort of inferring from what you said, but there isn't like with alcohol. Everyone knows you can become an alcoholic if you drink too much, and people monitor that in society because it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, and even then, we still get huge numbers of people worldwide becoming alcoholics. But we even restrict it to 18 years old, for example. Like we know, for example, with cannabis, that if you smoke cannabis before you're 25, it can cause mind damage to the brain that takes years to repair and the neuroplasticity to return. Yet, so that would be the perfect marker of it is safer to consume cannabis after 25, so only sell it to 25-year-olds or over, you know, for example. So where did we get to? I've sort of gone a bit off topic there. The novel experiences and unusual knowledge. So a bit, so that was sort of along that lines. Is like, it's funny how these experiences of these altered states reveal actual, like, for me it was like psychosis, for example. Like I firmly believed I'd died and gone to hell and had the most traumatic 6 years of my life. Yet out of the other side of it, I came to the conclusion that, say, the Buddha did, which is that reality is fundamentally an illusion, or like Albert Einstein's persistent illusion. And this ties into the psychedelic thing a little bit as well. It's just like you have to be willing to brave the horror to go into hell to be able to get to heaven. If you see what I mean, like you can't just suddenly demand of a drug or an experience or a practice that it will only be good. If you see what I mean.
Yeah. Although I'm not sure that. You know, like I think with psychedelics, that attitude isn't always the best one because, you know, I mean, at least from my experience, I mean, I'm not sure that, you know, like having, you know, like I don't know, I was on some forum, you know, and on Facebook, and people talk about ayahuasca and stuff, you know, and you know, people on there, like if someone on there saying, you know, oh, you know, I had this ayahuasca tree, and it was, you know, and all these kind of traumatic, awful things were happening to them. And then they were like, yeah, I'm going to do it again, and again, I'm planning to do this many because I figured that if I do this many, then I'll be cured, you know, and just like, oh, I'm going to keep putting myself through this terrible experience because I have this mad idea that it's going to help me. And it's like, I'm a bit skeptical of that.
Like, I mean, Graham Hancock talked about that.
You probably just traumatise yourself. And it's like, what's the point in that? Like,
Graham Hancock talked about his ayahuasca sessions in the Amazon, and he was saying that he said a very eloquent thing, which is like the ayahuasca brew shows you what the problems are. You then have to go and sort them out. You can't just bombard yourself with a drug until your problems are solved. Because that doesn't work. Like you just, like you said, you do just traumatise yourself.
Yeah, like that. Is that Alan Watts quote that get the message and hang up the phone?
Yeah.
Like
I lived
probably very good to bear in mind for psychedelics, I think.
I mean, it's not to say that they can't be of continued use, but like for example,
but it's knowing when not to push it. I think is kind of because.
Well, it's about integration. I think, like, I've done nothing else from psychosis. Was like I was hammering myself with ecstasy, and that caused me psychosis. It's like I kept wanting to go back to heaven. I kept wanting to go back to this place where I was telepathic and powerful and psychic. And eventually that happened, but I wasn't in heaven. I was in hell. You know. It's like these substances can be, because they are gateways to altered states, like a window through to another reality. The temptation is to go, that must be what's real, I'll go there permanently. And that's a real risk.
Well, and I think also just assuming that assuming that stuff's real just because you experienced it on a drug is probably rather silly.
Well, that's the initial assertion of a lot of people when they have a breakthrough dose of a drug. Is like with dimethyltryptamine, DMT, you always talk people saying that's the fundamental reality. And that's a faith-based statement. That's like you've experienced it. It was so vivid that means that is what is real. So this comes actually into the next bit that I want to talk to, which is my life is but a dream idea. Like the vividness of a reality doesn't determine its validity. because I've been in the dream state to these what I call hyper vivid dreams, where I've literally been in other dimensions. That's what it felt like, and you can see spectrums of color and light and like hyper gold and ultraviolet and all these other things that are not. I've never seen them in real life. Like it is like another reality exists in there that you can enter. But then to make a statement about what is the truth of your experience based on the vividness of something flies in the face of rational thinking in a certain way. Like, and I apply that inversely from that realization of the hyper vivid dream and some of the trips I've had. I imply that inversely back to this reality. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, how can I be certain that this reality has any validity as an objective reality when it's only based on my absorption, my memories, the vividness of it, and I've entered so many other realities that to assume that this one is the ground basis for reality is almost naive at that point. If you see what I mean. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant there.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, we talked about it before, haven't we? But I think
I've hammered on it, Eddie, about this relentlessly. It makes for good conversation.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
But I mean, I think maybe it's important to define what the word, if you're saying like if something's real or not, like what the word real means. Yeah,
I almost put it in like inverted commas.
Yeah.
Because like, for example, in the waking state, in an ordinary state of consciousness, what you perceive in an ordinary state, that's what's real to most people, because it's the most commonly shared experience. But we know we can go into altered states of consciousness where the amount of information that comes in is greater. It's empirically measurably a greater amount of data coming into the conscious mind when this, like we talked about earlier, this egoic self receives. So I guess, can you clarify the question a little bit?
Well,
or your objection?
Well, so I was thinking.
Talking about what is real, basically.
Yeah. So, for example,
my basic argument and I'll let you continue, is that the baseline of what is real is the ordinary mature ego waking state of consciousness. It's.
But why is that the baseline for what's real? And
because that's how we measure reality as.
But as we just talked about, it probably isn't real, like ego and stuff. Yeah. So. And in fact, there's nothing scientific about the ego. There's nothing scientific about
it's purely
the feeling of agency, or there's nothing scientific about anything.
Well, there's universals there. Everyone can be shown a practice of observation that then, like meditation practice, for example, that then displays to you, oh yeah, I'm not this conscious agent, and you can explore that to the nth degree. Like one Sam Harris talks about, that's really interesting, is looking into the space behind your closed eyes. That's quite a novel experience, because like you close your eyes and then you try to see as though you would with your eyes open, and suddenly there's all these bizarre shapes and colours, and even just that as a practice demonstrates that the mind is capable of in getting sensory data from other sources, even when sensory data is deprived. That's why you hallucinate in sensory deprivation time, for example. All I argue is that our the general consensus of most of the population is that the baseline for measuring what's real is the ordinary waking state of consciousness, whereas actuality, the sort of like we were saying earlier, the seat of experience is the conscious observation, and that can be carried through multiple states, and I think I've mentioned this to you before in a conversation we had when we were drinking whiskey once. It was quite fun. We believe this world is real because we're in it. That's where we draw our sense of reality. But if you've ever gone into a dream state consciously, like a lucid dream, and then tried to remember this life, this then seems just as unvivid and unrealistic and out of character with what the real world is to you in that lucid dreaming state, or that a vivid dream state. So this is a big part of chapter 1 of the book I'm writing, is discussing and talking about the different, because I separate reality into, are you happy for me to?
Yeah.
I separate reality into the waking states and the dreaming states, So the baseline of each one is, well, the center ground, I guess, would be the waking reality and the deep sleep state. So in the four waking realities are normal, everyday, ordinary waking state of consciousness. I hope I get this right. Then there's the kind of awakened state, which is where you are experiencing this kind of egoless state of like unfiltered reality, and then you gain a kind of lucidity and start to experiment with this new information. You start to explore the perspective in a waking state of what it's like to be without the ego. And then beyond that is this kind of oneness state we touched on briefly earlier, which is this kind of nirvanic state of total acceptance and bliss, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be blissful, but it's just like a huge sense of release. And they're the four waking states as I identify them. And then there's the deep sleep state, which is the absence of any reality, right? And that's my experience of it when I've gone into consciously as much as it's possible to go into the deep sleep state. For me, I found that it starts with like your body falls asleep, and you're aware that you're still conscious, but your body is moving completely autonomously. You can't influence it. You're within your body, and then this huge mental space opens up. And I think I talked to you this the other day when we were in the park about you've got these thought forms. So first you have the words, the linguistic thought, and then that sort of ceases to exist. Then you get the imagery, then you get the emotional capacity of that space, and then beyond there is just kind of this, that's the deep sleep state, is the self without any congruent reality to experience, and there's just that almost that observer again, that kind of like the pinpoint of light, you're just in an infinite void of potential. And then dreams, the next state, the sort of black and white dream, come out of, or like the vivid dream, which is beyond that, come out of this, like you run scenarios in that event then. So you become a disembodied consciousness in like an infinite mind space. It's not a void, it's like an infinite space of mind. And then you start to run scenarios. Like quite commonly, if you wake someone up from a deep sleep, for example, they'll be like, "Oh, I was just thinking about some weird shit. I don't really know." You know, it's just some bizarre thing you were thinking. But that's how you generate dreams, because you
starts with some weird like image or like words or story or some kind of
like a narrative sort of thing. And then that so you can see as a matter of your unconscious experience, like you these narratives generate a kind of stirring in that mental space until a reality is created. And that's the first stage is the black and white dream, which is akin to sort of Hades in Greek mythology. It's the kind of the unconscious realm of just like meandering through experience without any real attachment or identification with anything as significant. It's just like, sort of like when you're half asleep in the waking state, you just sort of like things are just happening and you're not really consciously observing them and nothing stands out. So your point of reference is just this kind of utterly asleep sort of thing. And then you can go further beyond that into the vivid dream state, which is where these scenarios are generated and then they start to play out as real things. You get this sense of reality. It's like the waking state again. It's a direct parallel with you are presented with a congruent reality. You're utterly immersed in it. You identify yourself as the person. You've accepted the kind of scenario and the chain of events, and then you live them out. You know,
I think it's real.
It's completely compelling. And then further state from that is when you enter that state and become aware it's a dream, which is the traditional lucid dreaming state, which is where you first enter in and you're like, okay, so I know it's a dream, yet it's still continuing. Let's experiment like we did in the lucid waking state. Let's experiment with the potential things that are possible, because you're in a purely consciousness generated state. You could develop superpowers. You can do phenomenal things and amazing things. And then the next stage beyond lucid dreaming, which I thought you might be interested in, was these hyper vivid dreams where you've attained your godlike power in the lucid dream state. You can do phenomenal, amazing God singular type things, then go and create whole shifts in reality, manifest, do anything you could possibly imagine, move at the speed of thought, all that sort of stuff. But then beyond that is that what feels like there are alien entities there, and this correlates with some other psychedelic experiences people describe from DMT. But it's very much a sense that there once you reach that God state, or God-esque state, you then are invited on adventures by these weird beings, and you kind of. I remember one particular way into that, I became lucid, and then I noticed that if I stop controlling the environment in the lucid state, a universe still exists. So you can take a back seat and still be lucid dreaming, still have the power, but not manifest anything. And then you can. And then I remember getting on. It was like this weird submarine thing with glass windows, and I was talking to these entities, and like they were like, "Come on," and they took me around like loads of different planets and stuff, and it was like, it was as though. And again, this state was so vivid, it was so hyper real, that it made this reality seem like the least significant, like the conscious waking state is the least significant aspect of potential human experience. And you can imagine with the gravity which I speak, how what that must be like. And that's just something I wanted to cover on the footage and have some sort of bounce around. And if you have any questions, I can cover them.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking but I just like a sentence you said just there at the end was it was like it made this one seem like the least significant.
In terms of
I thought maybe that was maybe a better word to use than real, for example.
Yeah.
Like rather than saying because it kind of seems logical that a self-generated reality, or in a reality generated entirely within the brain, would seem more significant. That kind of seems logical in a way because it is like it's kind of.
Well, I would argue it's created in consciousness, because we see REM sleep is like there's evidence for it in the brain, but it's kind of like the mind when it ceases to experience this reality can generate realities that are more realistic. But I don't know, this is maybe might sort of be a bit disparate. Like I think that this reality is like these forms of us are just like receivers for, or like we project out into this reality in the waking state. That's how I think the two states differ. It's like this is the observatory point in us exists in a kind of infinite space, and that with disembodied consciousness exists because it exists in us, and that we're just our bodies, and this reality, this form is just like just a zeroing down into one potential experience that we consistently return to.
So you're kind of arguing that, for example, like a hyper-vivid dream or reality wouldn't necessarily have to be generated in this brain because
although we can see
the consciousness itself kind of stands apart from this brain, or somehow, and then it could generate the reality instead of the brain needing to, because it can generate its own something like that.
Yeah, but further that, like, we know, for example, from a lot of I'm not going to go into quantum mechanics or anything like that, but we know, because I don't know enough about it to discuss it, but there's this element within neuroscience and there's various things that I'm drawing from to reach this conclusion, so it's not just an unfounded statement. But I'm of the impression, from what I've read and seen recently, that it's almost like the brain generates this reality. Like,
sure, yeah, well, everything
we're just like a little, like a electromagnetic current. And that any sense of this being real or solid is dependent on our existence in it.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
Of course, yeah.
So
I mean,
it's like,
every single thing you experience is generated by your brain.
Yeah. But then that's every experience that you have is generated by your brain in this state of existence, if you see what I mean. Like, because we can experience infinite number. Like I talked about it in my Life is But a Dream video on the Schizophrenia Forums channel. Like, if you think that you've been dreaming since you were in utero, and we know that dream time can be incredibly fast or incredibly short, or it can move non-linearly, you can be multiple people. And I sort of argue that, like, say you sleep 8 hours a night, and that leaves 16 hours a day, and you're 24 years old. That means that you've only been alive in the waking world for 16 years of that entire experience. The other 8 years have been spent in a potentially infinite time space. And it kind of adds credence to the argument that this is the least significant portion, as you sort of accepted that term, the least significant portion of our experience, because we exist in this reality for such a relatively small period with very limited power, very limited. It's just one linear story that we just keep consistently returning to as a matter of conscious experience. But we even know now in this reality, based on our measurement equipment that extends our senses beyond our direct perception. Sorry, I'm getting a bit carried away now. But yeah, the experience is that we even know that this reality is entirely self-generated as well as the dream world. So just to reduce it down to the brain, it is the only link I can see that rationalizes that is that the brain is a center in which consciousness kind of emanates from and projects out a reality. But in actuality, we're just the consciousness. Nothing else is objectively in existence.
Yeah,
that's quite a mouthful.
Although, where do you where do you say, because like the consciousness, so it's like, it's still, to me it still seems like a kind of slightly semantic thing, because it's like, if there's like, from moment to moment there's an experience, there's another experience, there's another experience, there's another experience, we tend, we then, because of the way we visualize things and the way we talk and the way we create language, we kind of say, oh, this is one thing, but really you've just got these just an experience, another experience, another experience, and it's this, so it's almost like it's a visualization to kind of say, oh, there is this.
Well, by virtue of me trying to explain it to you in the camera, like I have to
no, of course, but
it's not necessarily.
But what I'm wondering if maybe it's kind of a false or like a mental creation in order to say there is this thing, like there is this consciousness which is the consciousness, which is like a thing that actually exists sort of, independently. It's kind of isn't. I wonder if that's almost that kind of.
It's just part of a repartee of how I help people when I talk to them about it, like understand my perspective. The words naturally fall short. Like, yeah. Like I think I talk about this in this Life is But a Dream, and then we should move on as well, because I know we've been running for quite a while.
And I actually don't have much longer.
Okay, well, should we end it there?
Yeah.
That was a really cool point. No, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate that.
That's fun.
Say goodbye to the camera.
Ciao for now.
And yeah, I hope what you've seen has been interesting and not just led to more confusing things. Although hopefully it's raised a few questions. Who knows? Yeah, I'm David Bradley. This is From the Mind of a Mystic. We've had Eddie Hayden Smith, and thank you.